I spent $1,000 on this motherboard. Today, I'll be looking at the Asus Republic of Gamers Maximus Z790 Extreme. It's one of the most expensive motherboards on the market right now for Intel's 13th generation of processors. This motherboard is one of the sleekest boards on the market right now, and it is an example of a great design with enough extras to make it stand out and look great. The LGA 1700 socket is surrounded by massive heat sinks which cover the voltage regulator module. It makes it look like a giant coliseum, and I have an awesome looking CPU water block that I'm super excited to see in this setup. The socket also supports LGA 1200 cooling systems, but it is recommended to use the most updated LGA 1700 cooling systems on this board. This motherboard has great power delivery, touting 24+1 teamed power stages rated at 105 amps. You'll be set to overclock at any level, including LN2. Jumping to memory, we have 4 memory slots that support up to 128 gigabytes of DDR5 memory. Now this memory is able to run stably at 7800 mega transfers per second through Intel's Extreme Memory Profiles, or XMP profiles. Now you can overclock your RAM past this, but it isn't guaranteed that your system will run stable if you do so. Right next to the memory, we have a DIMM.2 slot. This Asus proprietary slot allows you to install the included DIMM.2 card into the motherboard, which expands your motherboard with 2 additional M.2 slots. You can then install 2 additional NVMe storage devices onto that card. With the 3 M.2 slots located underneath the lower heatsink, this motherboard supports 5 M.2 slots that you can place NVMe storage devices into. Your budget is definitely going to determine how many terabytes of this ridiculously fast storage you're going to be able to use with the motherboard, but this motherboard definitely is not lacking in storage options. One thing to note is that if you do use the PCI 5.0 M.2 slot, the lower PCI 5.0 port will be disabled. In addition to all of the M.2 slots that this motherboard has, there are 6 gigabit per second SATA ports that you can plug traditional platter hard drives or older style SSDs into. PCIe and SATA are available for RAID support through Intel's rapid storage technology. However, SATA ports 1 and 2 are not able to be used with this, nor are they allowed to be used as boot devices. Let's take a look at the back I/O panel, and one of the first features that we're gonna see is the BIOS flashback button. This button allows you to flash the BIOS at the hardware level versus using software or entering into the BIOS. This is an important feature in case of a BIOS update is released and it doesn't allow your computer to boot any longer. You can use a USB drive and place it into the BIOS labeled USB port, and then use the flashback button to flash your BIOS with a previous BIOS version and resolve that problem. It just makes things a lot easier and gives you that peace of mind that no matter what, you're going to be able to easily flash your BIOS at the hardware level. Some motherboards require you to jump pins together to clear the CMOS or remove the CMOS battery completely. The Z790 Extreme has a clear CMOS button, which makes it extremely easy to clear the CMOS. Next is a standard HDMI 2.1 port. This port is capable of supporting 4K at 60 Hz, so if you plan on using integrated graphics that come with your processor, you're going to get great 4K visuals. There is an included 10 gigabit Marvell Action Ethernet port. This port should allow you to prioritize different network traffic, and we're definitely going to be taking a look at that when we finish the build. Beside the 10 gigabit Ethernet port is a 2.5 gigabit Intel Ethernet port. In total, there's 7 Type A USB 3.2 Generation 2 ports, 2 Type C USB 3.2 Generation 2 ports, and 1 Thunderbolt 4 port. The motherboard supports Wi-Fi 6E and comes with an antenna. It also supports Intel's double connect technology, which allows you to connect to both 5 GHz bands and 2.4 GHz bands at once, which means that you can prioritize high traffic needs to the 5 GHz and low traffic needs to the 2.4 GHz. We're going to definitely test this out once we get the build complete. In terms of audio, we have an optical out port and we have traditional audio ports that are LED illuminated, and they support 7.1 surround sound. The board uses a Realtek ALC 4082 chip, and Asus added their own Supreme FX shielding technology as well. This technology pretty much amounts to a metal plate placed over the audio chip that helps mitigate electronic interference. The only reason this board is not going to meet your sound capability needs is if you work in the sound industry or just are a sound enthusiast. Otherwise, this board has great sound. When it comes to front I/O, this motherboard supports up to 4 additional USB Type-A 3.2 Gen 1 ports, 2 USB 2.0 ports, and it also supports a 60-watt fast charging USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C port. It also has an additional Thunderbolt 4 port. The Z790 Extreme motherboard also has the capability of overclocking your system outside of the BIOS. All you have to do is press the BCLK plus or BCLK minus button to increase or decrease your clock frequency. It is not recommended to do this, as this can actually introduce a lot of instability into your system, but it is an included feature if that is something that you are into and want to explore. The board also supports front headphone and microphone inputs using the supplied audio header. The motherboard also has an LN2 mode, which modifies how the self-timed circuitry operates so that your motherboard is able to start with some of the extremely low temperatures that LN2 introduces. The OSC Sense header is where you're going to use ROG True Voltition. This is going to allow you to read voltage fluctuations that are going to the CPU. However, if you don't trust those voltages, you can use a standalone multimeter at 12 of the provided measuring points. This is for true hardcore overclockers or just curious individuals. The board has a dual BIOS, which means that you can easily change between the two BIOSes by using the provided switch. On one BIOS, you could run a very high overclock, and the other BIOS, you could run a very stable setup. That way you can easily switch between the two depending on what you want to do. It's not a necessary feature, but it's definitely a very good quality of life feature. The retry button is a great overclocking feature, and when pressed, it tells the system to reboot in quick succession without changing settings until it gets a successful post. This is used when you're stretching your system to the absolute limit with overclocking and you're right on the edge of not being able to boot up. Slow mode lowers the CPU frequency and is used mostly for LN2 overclocking. However, be sure that this is not set, as your CPU might operate at much lower speeds than you want it to during normal operation. The flex key by default will reboot the system, but it can be reassigned in the BIOS to something such as safe boot mode. If you're bench testing your Z790 Extreme, the start button is where you're going to be able to boot up your system. Otherwise, you're going to be using the power button on your case. The V-latch switch enables you to view the onboard voltage regulation. It's going to record true highest and true lowest voltage for you to view. The board comes with a standard system header that allows you to plug in case features such as a power button or any LED indicators. Everyone loves RGB, and this motherboard comes with plenty of headers to support all of your RGB needs. There's also 2 4-pin CPU fan headers so that you're able to run any cooler that you would like to. There's also 2 4-pin chassis fan headers, as well as 2 4-pin radiator fan headers so that you can plug 4 fans directly into the motherboard. Side connections are at a 90-degree angle, which makes it great for cable management, and the cover over top gives the ports a nice, clean, sleek look. This board also supports running 2 water pumps at once and provides you with 2 different water pump headers. Asus also developed their own proprietary water block sensor header. It allows you to run 2 thermal sensors, a flow rate sensor, and a leak sensor all through one 9-pin header. The water in and out headers are to be used with temperature sensors. If you do want to enable the 60-watt fast charging port for the front of your computer case, make sure that you do supply this 6-pin power connector with an appropriate connection from your power supply. The I/O panel cover is nice and sleek, and it does display the name of the motherboard. However, I am definitely more of a no branding fan, but it is what it is. The Animatrix panel is an interesting addition to the motherboard, and I'm not too sure yet how I feel about it, as I'm gonna have to wait until I build the system and see what I can make it do before I make any decisions on that feature. The board also has a digital code display, which will display codes as the board is going through its power up process. If any errors occur, it's gonna give you a code that will give you information on how to troubleshoot the board. In addition, the board also has LEDs dedicated to each component, and during post, if any of the components fail, that LED will stay lit and you'll know exactly which component failed post. Below all of this is an OLED screen that is capable of displaying system information. Once I get the system built, I'll be able to play around with it and see just how cool it is. The motherboard has two PCI 5.0 x16 slots, however, is only capable of running one at the full x16. If you are using both slots, they will run in x8. Between the two PCI 5.0 slots, there is a PCI 4.0 x4 slot. That's all the features of the Asus ROG Maximus Z790 Extreme. Now let's take a look at all the extras that come with it. So that's what spending $1,000 on a motherboard is going to get you. Thanks for watching.